He was in Philadelphia since 1991, running Center City District. Yeah. Paul has really been, I've had the opportunity to see him speak at several different conferences, and he's really mentored many of the business improvement district leaders, or has been a thought leader on many of the discussions about the challenges that they have faced really since the 90s up until now. And so I really appreciate, Paul, you being here. Paul also serves on the Convention and Visitors Bureau in Philadelphia. He teaches in the Graduate City Planning Department of the University of Pennsylvania, and he holds a master's and PhD from Columbia. So thank you, Paul. We're thrilled to have you here. Larisa Ortiz, I know Larisa also from the International Downtown Association, who Larisa, when I first met Larisa, she owned her own retail consulting firm. And Larisa was part of the Downtown Revitalization Initiative for Clinton Square. She was really excited to see that construction was happening under a Clinton Market Collective. So when we walked by, that was really exciting. She is now a managing director of Public Nonprofit Solutions, and she brings over at Street Sense. I should say the name of the company. Larisa brings over 25 years of experience in advising public, private, and nonprofit sector clients on retail, real estate strategies, and urban environments. She has led hundreds of comprehensive retail planning efforts across communities, large and small, both nationally and internationally. Larisa has done many of the DRI projects here in upstate New York as one of the consultants on those projects. So she has a really great perspective of upstate. Right? You said you were doing Schenectady, right? Are you on Schenectady? Oh, excellent. Yeah. Yeah, so Larisa definitely understands, while she's from New York City, she understands the upstate challenges. She holds an undergraduate degree from Wesleyan University and a master's in city planning with a certificate in urban design from MIT. She also is a mayoral appointee on the New York City Planning Commission, so she has some interesting perspectives there as well. And then for the local perspective, we have Eric Simonds, who is an associate broker at CBRE Upstate New York. He's been in commercial real estate since 2022 with a strong accounting background. He's worked as an asset manager for a commercial real estate developer and landlord. And Eric joined the Albany office in December of 2021 and is focused on representing tenants and buyers, as well as providing consulting services to his clients, which include law firms, colleges, universities, corporations, hospitals, very different than hospitality, hospitals, government, and associations. Eric has earned his certificate of commercial investment member designation in 2018. And so we're thrilled to have all three of you here. What I'm going to do, I need to get you. What part of what we want to do today is give you a little bit of the local perspective, and then Paul and Larisa are going to talk a little bit about the national perspective. And in the conversations we have, Albany really, it isn't that different from what we're seeing in the rest of the world, right? So talking about the current conditions. So one of the things we talked about was that pre-pandemic, we here in Albany, this number, we have, according to Placer AI, which is based on cell phone data, we're seeing that 78% of our daytime employees are back coming to the office. That's up almost 30% over last year and 100% over 2021. But a good portion of those folks are working hybrid. So they're averaging only 3.7 days a week in the office, which is having a big impact for our retailers. Hybrid, so hybrid seems like it's making on any given day, we have about 60% of our workforce here. in downtown, with Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays being our busiest days. And I am excited to report that employees are staying an extra half an hour longer than they did last year. So we'll take it. Hopefully that's shopping, happy hour, going out to lunch here in downtown. And then a lot of what we look at is, well, how does that match up with the parking authority seeing with their numbers? And so these are some of their numbers, and you can see that certainly the same. It's relatively almost the same. The daytime parkers, more people are going to dailies because they're only here 2 days a week, so it's not worth it for them to spend a full month to buy a full month pass. But the exciting piece that we're seeing is that event nights are almost triple. And that's what's really exciting, right? So it's the MVP Arena, it's Empire Live, it's the Palace. And so that is bringing people from out of the city into the city for dinner and for shows. And so that is the good news that we're seeing across the parking authority members. And so also then talking a little bit about our visitors, right? So this is also from Placer, and so you can see the big drop, right? So we have 2019, then 2020 is the big drop, and then you can see that we're slowly, steadily coming back with visitors into downtown. And that then is also reflected, this is information I received from Discover Albany, in our hotel occupancy recovery. And so the big bump there you can see is the NCAA men's basketball tournament that came in March and had a huge impact here in downtown Albany. But you can see year over year we're continuing to increase our hotel occupancy. But so a lot has been said about fully remote, hybrid, and so a study recently out of Stanford showed that pre-pandemic, roughly 7% of the workforce was fully remote. Post-pandemic, I don't know if you can say that, but post-pandemic, it's only gone up to about 12%. And 29% of workers are hybrid, and then 59% are fully back in the office, according to their most recent study. And so I'm going to turn it over to the panel and say, ask this question: do you think remote and hybrid work has plateaued, or will it continue to change over the next few years? So part of why they're smiling is I think, we don't fully know what's going to happen, right? I think there's still some questions. And so even amongst the panelists, we have different opinions about what we think, but ultimately the solutions we believe are the same. So you might hear some different ideas here that we're going to talk about, and they'll express why they'll support their opinions. But then we're going to talk about some solutions that we all relatively agree on. So Paul, I'll invite you to speak first. Do you think we've plateaued?
Simple answer, no, but I think it's really important to differentiate different types of work. Healthcare and education tends to be back at a much higher level. It's a face-to-face type of interaction. Hospitality, obviously, restaurants are back at a much higher level, and office is the one that's lagging. But even within office, there are types of industries that really tend to be remote. Financial services and technology tend to be more remote than architecture, a lot of creative industries as well. So one, very hard to make generalizations across the board. You happen to be fortunate in terms of not being highly dependent at this point on financial services or technology. So you have, I think, a starting point really to have a lot of success. The other thing I'll say is I do not believe we have plateaued. I think we're in a very gradual, from my point of view, painfully slow recovery process. But to me, it's all about leadership. It's all about business and political and civic leaders creating the case statement to come back. And then within offices, you can't order employees back. We're not in a world of top-down command. But the most successful firms are creating reasons to be in the office. They're building a social environment. They're investing more in common amenities. And I'll talk a little bit about what we need to do around office buildings in a moment. But to me, we should not be paralyzed. We've been through a crisis. We've been through 3 successive crises: COVID, mandated shutdown, and in many cities, a lot of civil disorder, rethinking of what police are all about. That's 3 shock waves, which are larger than I think any of us ever lived through. So this is unprecedented. I think we can all debate our own opinions. None of us really know where this is going, but I think it is much more within our control than we really think. And I would not look at a lot of national data. I would do what you're doing here. Look at your own trends. What can you foster and grow? For a different opinion.
Last time we were talking about this, and I think in some ways we end up in the same place, but we take different routes there. Our firm focuses on developing some of the market analysis and metrics that help developers determine how much they should build and how much they can support. So I come at this from the perspective of trying to understand how much retail, and our focus is on retail, but downtowns are complicated organisms, right? You cannot say retail. Retail exists because there are office workers. Retail exists because there are residents. So we have to understand those components of the market. So, when we look at hybrid work and we see the sticky nature of hybrid work, I look at it in the context of historical precedent. When have we not seen technology change the world? When we look at, and I don't know if you're going to this, technology has changed the way in which we work in the past 2 or 3 years. Zoom, Box, Slack, Teams. We did not have the same kind of access, and the ability of employees to utilize those technological tools has increased significantly. So while I agree that we don't know what's going to happen, I think it would be naive of us to perhaps not assume that's going to have some sort of impact. And I actually want to ask all of you, how many of you work from home at least 1 day a week? Raise your hand. This is a tough one. Like you're good. Albany's good. Usually when asked that question, 80% of the folks in the room raise their hand. And when you ask who wants to remain at home, we see that the average employee saves 70 minutes a day in commute time, there and back and getting ready. We see the savings that reduction commute has offered folks. So employees are very, very resistant right now to going back, and that dynamic and balance is going to be very key to whether we see a plateau or not, because employers acknowledge that, and some of the study you mentioned out of Stanford is that an employee sees the ability to work from home as the equivalent to an 8% pay raise. So if an employer acknowledges that and has to increase pay in order to get people in the office, we just see an economic dynamic that may make it more difficult to get everybody back in the office.
Quickly, totally agree with what Larisa said, but your point in raising hands here. Cities that are having a huge hard time getting people to come back, New York, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, terribly long commute times pre-pandemic. The ability for work from home in those cities was a huge gain of 45 minutes an hour each way. Smaller cities, shorter commutes, the more people you have live downtown, the easier it is to get people to come back to work. So again, think about your own local strengths. The national trends are real. What you can do here could be very different, given the intimate and smaller scale and a good transit system.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you want me to?
No, do you mind, Eric? Eric, can we talk a little bit about some of your slides?
Sure. Of course, I don't have an answer to have we plateaued or not. I certainly hope so, because studies recently have shown that we're probably at a productivity rate for labor in the 1948 level. It's the lowest it's been since then. So obviously, the number one culprit of that is remote work. And in fact, I was telling meeting yesterday with these guys, I was telling a story of, I've got a friend that actually has a device that moves her mouse back and forth. She works from home full time. So when she leaves her desk, it's moving her mouse, so the computer doesn't go to sleep, and it keeps moving the mouse on the screen, so like she's working. So you wonder why worker productivity is down. This is a snapshot of the market. And when we look at a commercial real estate market, we generally look at 3 metrics. The first is inventory. How much space do you have? the vacancy and vacancy rate and the asking price. Please keep in mind, this is year-end 2022. We do our reports twice a year, so we should have our new report completed within a few weeks. But this is a snapshot of year-end. You can see total inventory, which Georgette talked about, 4.5 million square feet. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. The overall vacancy rate was 12.1%. If I had to guess, over the last 6 months, that number's gone up. And I'm sure it's to no surprise to anyone here. But following the Great Recession, I think we peaked in 2012, our vacancy rate was 24%. So please keep that in mind as we talk through these numbers. And then the asking rate, this has largely been stagnant, $19.89. It fluctuates here and there, but for the most part, it's been pretty stable, believe it or not. We have a further breakdown of Class A, B, and C properties as well. I will point out the one anomaly we're seeing now that we didn't see in 2009, 10, 11, 12 is we have a high vacancy rate for Class A product, 23%. What happened during the Great Recession was we saw a lot of migration, what we call flight to quality. So Class C users were seeing deals for Class A, B space, so they move up in quality to B space, and then B users move up to A space because prices have come down a little bit or other inducements. We haven't seen that this time around, and the majority of the reason why is I think people are and office users are still hesitant to make long-term plans. So they're, so to speak, kicking the can down the road of, I'll just do a short-term extension until I figure out what kind of space I'm going to need for the future. So that's a different phenomenon that's occurring right now. Next slide, please. Georgette touched on this. If you look at this chart, June, mid-year 2012 is at the bottom, going up to mid-year last year. This is our total office inventory in downtown Albany. In 2012, we had 5.6 million square feet of office space. And we ended, or mid-year last year, we had what we have now, 4.5 million. So we lost 1.1 million square feet of office space. And I hesitate to use that word lost. This is a good thing. Our market actually right-sized itself. All of that 1.1 million square feet, most of it, pretty much all of it, was converted to residential apartment use, which is what our downtown needed. We didn't need the supply that we had. We were way out of equilibrium. We were never going to absorb that much office space. So we saw it benefit the office market because it really told a true picture once we got rid of all that space that our vacancy rate isn't 25%. It really should be in the 12, 13, 14% range where it was. And then obviously there's other benefits to downtown itself. Just having more people living downtown is a great thing. So that's a recap of our market where we are.
Yeah, we will hold on to the mic because I have two statistics I want to share. So according to Moody's, the Northeast saw the biggest increase in the amount of sublease space listed on the market between the first quarter of 2022 and the first quarter of 2023, and that was 32%. And eventually, higher amounts of sublease space will convert to direct vacancy if those spaces aren't leased by another tenant before the property's term has expired. I know it's some of the conversations we've had with many of the property owners. And then the other piece is that they're seeing nearly 2/3 of all tenants plan to reduce the real estate footprint in the next 2 years. And so while most will reduce their overall footprint, they also want to simultaneously optimize their current space with amenities and services to increase office usage and experiences. So Eric, on both of those, is that what you are seeing here in the market when people are renewing leases? Are they downsizing? Do you know anything about the sublease market here in Albany?
Yeah, there's sublease opportunities in the market. I've focused since we're with the bid on downtown alone. There's several opportunities now, and has been. I don't think it ever in mid-year 2020, it seemed like everybody was going to put space on the market for sublease. It didn't quite happen that way. In certain areas it did. Here, upstate New York, it did not happen that way. Ended up being not much of a concern. My bigger concern is the availability rate, which takes into account vacancy rate, and then space that's not actually being marketed, doesn't count in vacancy, but also space that is currently under lease, what we call shadow space. It's under lease, but it's not being occupied or utilized, and it's not being marketed for sublease. Basically, the tenant's still paying rent on it, but what happens when that expires? If they're paying rent on the space that they don't use, they're going to give it back to the landlord. That's a bigger concern because we don't know what percentage of the market that is, other than counting maybe parking lots and how many cars are in the parking lot versus what they were before. You just don't know what the utilization rate really is, but I can tell you that it's much less than it was. That's my bigger concern.
We've been tracking shares of the largest REITs, including downtown REITs that are focused on office, and we've seen 63% reduction in shares of the value of those shares. And so I think that, when we look at valuations and where Wall Street thinks this is going, I mean, there is generally a concern in the industry. These are not folks who are interested in devaluing their own property. So I think if we take that and think about what that means, I'm sort of curious what your take is on that and here in the Albany market.
My one concern is I invested in REITs a while back, so that. But there's demand still. And Georgette, you asked about my personal experience. Have I seen tenants reduce their space needs or increase or stay the same? It's really a mixed bag, and it's not one industry versus another. You had mentioned the financial industry, they tend to work more remote. I did 2 transactions just in the last 12 months where a financial services company expanded their space. There's no set and fast rule of which industries are going to do it, in my experience anyway, and which need more, which need less, which stay the same. It's a mixed bag. It really depends on the individual company, depends on the individuals within the company. Believe it or not, some people still do like going to the office, and companies do want to enhance their culture, and it's just very difficult to think about things like onboarding new employees remotely. It's very difficult. You end up getting employees like my friend with the mouse thing. Do they answer all your questions?
You did, yeah, thank you. Paul, I wanted to talk a little bit with you. We talk about this flight to quality and sort of, I think you had actually said you almost need to, we use the word commute worthy, right? Like you need to make it so that people want to get out of the pajamas, they're willing to get in the car. Our commute isn't very long, but you talked about almost treating employees, they're almost like visitors now to downtown. And so they're looking for some of the same amenities that visitors are when they're coming to work. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing?
Sure, and let me just combine with what Eric said. I think this is where Larisa and I were disagreeing last night, and I think converged, is there's 2 paths you need to go down. The conversion, the taking 1 million square feet of office space out of inventory and converting it to residential is an incredibly positive thing for you to do. That creates other demand for downtown, other foot traffic downtown. It reinforces the commercial office sector. At the same time, is what is office work? Office work for people who have the choice to work remotely also generates jobs for janitors, mechanical engineers, security staff, transit operators, retail stores. You lose those office workers and you lose a lot of mid-wage and entry-level jobs. So you want to have inclusive growth in this city. You need to make a priority about what can we do. And I agree, individual leadership brings back individual employees. Clearly those firms, and when we use the phrase flight to quality, what those businesses and buildings are doing is enriching the amenities in their office space, creating more social space in there. If you're giving up your living room and having to take off your pajamas and sweatpants, you want some sort of socializing function within the office. So we're seeing a lot of firms upgrade the mix, and clearly those well-endowed owners and buildings can afford to do that. And that's what's luring people out of other buildings. Simultaneously, you need to be converting a lot of the other buildings to residential use and not put artificial barriers. And I'll just jump in on this one. If you try to put affordable housing in the most expensive housing to build, which is new housing, you won't be able to build very much. You want to achieve affordable housing, you can achieve it in neighborhoods where your stock is existing. So I would push for as much market rate with the inclusion of affordable where it makes sense, but convert vacant inventory at the same time as you're pushing within individual firms. And then I'll talk a little bit, how do you animate the public environment around office buildings? You can activate plazas, or you can activate parks, which you're doing and we're doing, but we're starting to activate the plazas around office buildings at 4 o'clock for events for employees who are there to create a social gathering space. So the downtown, the goal is incredibly mixed use. You want office, you want hotel, you want healthcare, you want students, you want retail. The more the mix, the healthier your downtown is how I would put it.
I would agree. I mean, we land on that precise same place. The diversification of uses in downtown is what creates a healthier environment. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. And what we saw is that office-dominant environments struggled the most. And I will say that, as we look at, one thing I will be careful about is, a lot of people assume that even 1,000 units of residential will create incredible demand for retail at the ground floor. And in fact, even if we assume that we can capture, generally we assume that there's incremental demand for every unit of between 8 square feet to say 24 square feet. So for your 1,000 units, you can support between 8,000 to 24,000 square feet of retail, which is actually not very much. In contrast, your 70,000 units in downtown Philadelphia can support between 560 to 1.68 million square feet of retail. So we know we need office workers to balance it out. We know we need visitors to balance it out. We know we have to create a better mousetrap that brings people downtown to enjoy the social functions of downtown. I often joke, sex will save the city. Because what if young people want to do? They want to find their partner one day in life. And you're not going to do that if you're sitting at home in your pajamas behind a computer. So those are the things we have to embrace about our downtown environments. The fact that they're fun places to socialize and we're human creatures. And that's what we want.
So a lot of the conversation last night was, is it cyclical or is it disruptive? And so I'm going to ask Larisa if you want to go through.
Sure. So my theory is that we're living through a transportation revolution disguised as a digital revolution. And I think about transportation a lot because I do, and I appreciate your comments. As an urban planner, I see city building and population growth. It's often the result of successful transportation investment. So I just share this example of the Nyack ferry. I have a place and we shut down. It was because the George Washington Bridge and the Bear Mountain Bridge had been built. We could not force the success of this ferry as much as we really wanted to. And if we go to the next slide, and when the Tappan Zee Bridge was built, within the first 5 years of the construction of this bridge, the population of Rockland County increased by 50%. I share this because in many ways, the fact that we can sort of magically walk into our living room or our home office and transport ourselves to a Zoom call and I met with my colleagues this morning remotely. It's a form of transportation. Zoom is a form of transportation. And I think we should acknowledge that it's really that opportunities that it gives us to connect with people that not just in our downtown environments, but there are going to be significant impacts. So just to give you a sense of what this means for a city like New York, and I agree with you 1,000%, every single downtown is different. But to give you a sense of, what we're seeing, the loss of even folks for 2 days a week in New York City results in about $12.5 billion in spending lost. Which is the equivalent of about 20 million square feet of space that we can't support in New York City anymore. And then go to the next slide. And that's about 500 blocks of retail in New York City. that we can't support anymore. So I think the existential question that many communities have, and I will say you have a lot of retail on South Pearl that maybe doesn't want to be retail anymore. And what do we do, and how do we concentrate retail activity to where it really wants to be? How do we create 2 to 3 wonderful blocks of something, that allows people to cross shop and connect with one another in one place? And you know, to Paul's point, every single office market has different exposure to the challenges that we've seen in COVID. And it depends in part on what the percentage of office workers were originally in your downtown, right? It makes a ton of sense. If those are the folks you lost, you're going to be more effective. So we see where we have a large share of workforce in office-based occupations, we have higher vacancy rates. And we see that in communities, particularly where we have very strong technological services, where we have consulting and management, financial services that lend themselves to remote work. And in New York, you know, we've got a 17.2% vacancy rate. And if we look on the next one, and here you're 12.2%. So, you know, if you look at Albany, actually, you're in better shape than other communities. And I like that a lot of people didn't raise their hand that they're working remotely too much, because I think that really holds you in good stead.
Do you mind, Paul, when we were talking, I've heard you say you've been doing this for 30 years. Right. You've been through 3 or 4 of these. Right. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've discovered there's a very few advantages to having white hair, which is as long as your memory's holding up. I've lived through the 1970s when cities were dead. They were doomed. Nobody was ever coming back, and everybody was moving to the suburbs. I lived through the technological revolution when we had the new thing, right? And every computer was going to abolish the ability to be any place at all. We've got AI now, which is going to replace all of us, right? So, I mean, I don't mean, and I completely agree with what Larisa is saying. There's a major transformation going on that we need to respond to. But the world of media is the world of hype. So the new thing is the totally transformational thing, and nothing will ever be the same again. And human beings also are about continuity. So yes, we've been thoroughly disrupted. Yes, we're going to need to change. Yes, integrating Zoom into our life is a clear benefit in many ways. Any of you who've tried to work with your staff and know that you don't read body language when you see just their little picture on the screen, you don't have the casual bumping into a staff member in your office, you don't run into somebody on the street, all the serendipity of individual collisions in different places, I think you miss. It's a great technology. I totally agree with Larisa. If I can connect with somebody in Paris this afternoon and in San Francisco tomorrow and in Tokyo, that's great. Technology is wonderful. Email allows us to do this. But human beings are social animals. I totally agree with them. We will never propagate if we're all just on Zoom all the time, right? It's just not going to happen, right? So, I mean, we are social animals for biological reasons, but we are much more productive when we're together. That doesn't mean we can get on airplanes and fly to other cities. But I think the hype and the exaggeration is something we need to avoid because it paralyzes you. This is a new situation. We need to adapt to it. But your commitment to place, what the downtown organization is doing, what the mayor is doing, what the transit agencies are doing, you've got a commitment to place. You want to rebuild this place because it's a place of opportunity for people who don't have the choice to work remotely. So I would just remain committed to a vision that you've had, but really diversifying. This is where we totally agree. You can't have all your eggs in one basket. The more hotels, the more residential, the more retail, the more education that supplements your office buildings, the more vital Albany will be. Oh, you want me to do
yes,
so? All right, so this is an image of our office district. Blue is office buildings. That's about 40 million square feet of space. But everything that's maroon or pink is now residential. A lot of that is a huge inventory of former office buildings that we converted to residential or new construction residential within our office district, and yellow are hotels. And so this is still very much a single-use area. This is still our lowest pedestrian volumes. Our pedestrian volumes here are half of 3 blocks to the south, which is our primarily retail and residential district. But the more we diversify that, the more that comes back. You have what do you have? What I don't know what you have next. All right. This is just a map of land use again, but that's office, that's hotel, that's condo, apartment. This is 30 years of work of moving from a 9-to-5 downtown to taking 9 million square feet of office space out of inventory, converting it to office and hotel, adding arts and culture. The more multicolored the land use dots in your downtown, the more vital your downtown is. The more surface parking lots you fill in with buildings or parks, the more vital your downtown is. What do you have next? I don't know what's coming up. All right, now this is the type of inventory. You've got this great late 19th century and early 20th century architectural inventory. You've got extraordinary buildings in the city. Many of them lay out very well for residential or for hotel. I really prioritize that. These are warehouses you're looking at. Early 20th century office buildings converted to residential. Go ahead, next slide. And then, should I jump to this?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
and then I'll just do this quickly. Simultaneously, these are events we're doing at 4:30, because everybody told us 5 o'clock. People have already left, so 4:30. These are parties on plazas in partnership with building management and firms. People have come into work, music, entertainment, drinking, socializing, to activate what had been barren office plazas. We used to do live at lunch only in our major park that we manage. We're doing lunchtime concerts on office plazas just to create that social environment outside the office building. And this is our Get Drunk After Works promotion. This is bars and restaurants. We had to suspend this obviously during COVID, but just animating the downtown. Your younger office workers love this. And clearly those younger office workers who benefit most for the mentoring that goes on within office buildings. I don't know what we have next. Anything else? Or yeah, okay. No, that's good. So I think, just as I said before, is that as you need to rethink the office space as a more social workspace, you need to think the space around it as more social. And people are saying, let's not call it a central business district, let's call it a central social district. I think it's both. It needs to be a place for arts, entertainment, sports, housing, but also a place for work. And that's the vision I think you're working towards. So I just urge you to continue to go down that road.
So I want to ask Larisa one question, and then we'll go into closing remarks, and then I'll open it to a Q&A. But one of the things Larisa and I were talking about is that the bid district is 50 blocks. And so that means 50 blocks worth of first floor retail spaces. And given the numbers that she just shared with us, maybe we can support one block of retail with residential, with some visitors we have coming in and the daytime population. So we talked a little bit about right sizing first floors. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, there are a lot of pieces that go into, the downtown uses. I think that I'll put it out there, we can't support all of the ground floor retail you could have, particularly in older downtown. So how do we right that? But what do you do with what's left? And so one of the things we've been looking at, and I'm obsessed with taking pictures of buildings that were once one thing and now another, and I love seeing old storefronts that have become residential, ground floor units, or ground floor residential that has become retail. I recently went back and reread Jane Jacobs, and everybody talks about Jane Jacobs wanting retail everywhere. That's never what she said. What she said was that she wanted a diverse mixed-use environment on the ground floor that allowed for flexibility of uses and allowed us to move from one thing into another, and too frequently in downtowns. And I'm an urban planner, so I will take the hit, for urban planners. We tend to think that we can, codify this thing that we want to see downtown. Retail is the right thing, and it should be on every single ground floor of every building without necessarily understanding whether there's sufficient demand. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is that finding and encouraging more demand so that we can fill more space is another piece of this. And we're really leaning into neighborhood building now, recognizing that we have to make downtown a wonderful neighborhood, a great place to live. And last night we started talking about social infrastructure, dog parks, playgrounds, the kinds of things that will make people want to live here. And as I look at this huge empty space here, I hope we all put retail on the ground floor of whatever is there. Create a wonderful, walkable residential neighborhood that can support the demand along South Pearl and can create more demand for retail along South Pearl. So you can fill in another block or two. So that's the second thing. And the third, we've done a lot of work over the years on best-in-class retail environments. And even the Walnut Street was actually one of the streets that we looked at. You often don't find more than 2, 3, maybe 4 blocks of dense retail offerings, even in environments that have millions of visitors coming every year. So, I really want folks to think about just how much they can support and step back from this desire to want to see retail on the ground floor of everything, because you're not going to get it and you're going to see vacancies, and that's actually a cancer that hurts all the other businesses that are already there.
Piggyback on that, we were talking about this as well last night, which is that a mayor, you have to worry about the whole city, a bid has to worry about the whole bid. But many cities, Philadelphia, Albany, you have more downtown than you have demand for downtown. That's why you have vacant storefronts, that's why you have vacant lots. You both need to provide some uniform level of benefit, but you've got to pick those strategic nodes where you already have success and build from that success. Larisa's comment about the square footage that X square feet of office or residential can generate is really important to keep in mind. We can't wish demand for retail into existence. And the market loves clustering. So you both need to think about providing benefits to everybody within the bid, but pick those target areas where you've already got nodes of strength and reinforce those. At the same time as you're doing something for everybody, you have to do more for some places to build on. Very hard to do politically, but absolutely necessary to build it downtown.
Paul, you've said that cities are acts of creation, right? And I think that goes right in line with what you're saying. Are there any other, I'm just going to wrap up because I want to make sure we leave enough time for Q&A. But are there any other nuanced policies or investments that could remake our downtowns more interesting and more desirable and more vibrant places for people? Or is there anything based on the walking tour that we did and the conversation we had last night that you would want to leave with us?
Well, I think, steal what Larisa was saying last night, is don't let your zoning code create straitjackets for you. The more flexible, the more you can flip from one use to the other. You can't be prescriptive. This must be a hotel. This must be office. Have the most flexible zoning code for conversion so you can be prepared for anything. I think, as I said before, you have an amazing inventory of great historic buildings, which just don't exist in a lot of other places. How you capitalize on those, whether it's for architectural walking tours, but more importantly for people to want to put housing in those, is really key. And just be strategic and opportunistic. We don't know what's coming around the curve. Who would have predicted AI 5 years ago? Who would have predicted the internet in 1975 or 1980? Who would have predicted digital sales online? So be flexible, be adaptable, and pay attention to trends in other cities, and then figure out how you capture them from here. But look at cities that are comparable to Albany. You're not going to be Paris or London, right? But what can you borrow from them? What could you borrow from other mid-sized cities? But constantly keep looking ahead and don't listen to the pessimists. The cities have proved them wrong every single time.
I think naturally I'm probably an optimist since I'm in the commercial real estate business, but I think speaking of those opportunities, there's great opportunities in this city right now. It's been mentioned a couple times, Liberty Park right behind us. 6 acres of urban land. Where would you ever find that? It holds great promise. There's other projects out there that I'm sure you guys have all heard, but like the Albany Waterway project, the canal. Think about what that would do for vitality and Paul's drinking parties after work. It's just revolutionary ideas like that that will generate demand for all sectors of the real estate and all services of the city.
I do want to put in a plug for the 787 meeting with DOT, the open house that they're having this evening at 4:30 to 7:30 at the media room at the MVP Arena. If you're around, please come and weigh in on their revisioning of 787. Sorry, your waterway made me think about
Nope, it's all set.
Larisa, is there anything else that you want to add before we go to Q&A?
I would just say, since Karin is here and representing CDTA, transportation and accessibility, one of the things, and we're learning this from Paris, and we're learning this from cities that have embraced micro-mobility in particular. We've seen, whenever I run the numbers and I show, how much demand can you support with a 5-minute walk shed? How much demand can you support with a 5-minute micro-mobility shed? And the number of customers that you can connect to within 5 minutes by just making it easier for them to get downtown safely is incredible. So just from a market perspective, we've seen in New York City, I think is a wonderful example of Safe Bike was I recently bought an e-bike, and frankly, I spend a lot more time, I live in Queens, spend a lot more time eating in Long Island City than I ever did before, because now it's a 10 to 15 minute lovely bike ride along a safe route, and I can get there, it's enjoyable, and I can do it with my son. Whereas before I couldn't, it was a half an hour train ride, right? So transportation, I think, is so key to everything that creates a wonderful city.
All right, so I'm going to open it up. Do people have some questions for our panelists? Jeff.
I'm curious, in your studies, listening in particular, are you seeing a shift in demographic mindset towards public transport, public transit, and micromobility? We're a very car-centric region, and there's definitely, there's definitely a predisposition towards using cars, and it's very hard to convince our small cities to start to depark the downtowns. And all the data says that the younger people who are starting to move into these downtowns are not it's more expensive to own a car, it's more expensive to buy a car, but there's data. Do you see that shift actually happen?
Absolutely. I think every city that we're in, when we look at the demographics of who's living in downtown and downtown adjacent neighborhoods, generally it's folks at a life stage where they don't have kids, right? Either they're younger or they're older. And certainly the younger folks who are living in downtown have a predisposition to, not owning a car and embracing the fact that they want to be in a walkable urban environment, which means they might have a bike, or so they get around in a lot of different ways. And one of the things we're seeing is, how do we keep that customer downtown? Because the minute that they get into their car, we have lost them as a downtown customer. They leave downtown. So they're already here. Let's try to keep them. Let's try to deepen the penetration rate for our downtown customers. Make it a wonderful place again. Give them a dog park so they go out with their dog and they grab a coffee on the way. I mean, these are the things that sort of create great environments, but lean into, the demographic characteristics of who's already in downtown.
I think it's more for Paul. Larisa, I agree with you that larger city people are gravitating to stay in those downtown environments. Fortunately, we're not right there yet. We hope to get there at some point down the road. It'll take a long time to do that, but we're still chasing that back. One of the things we're seeing besides hybrid workplace, we're seeing a lot of companies leaving downtown because they get lost associated with that maybe hard. Fortunately, that's what they do us for a while. Live that environment downtown. You recognize a lot of these now. So what have you seen in this since that Philadelphia? How do you make them overcome that loss of parking?
So Paul, before you go, I just want to make sure people in the back can hear the question. It was tied to the the additional economics of parking, adding to a price per square foot for a downtown location. And what has Paul seen in Philadelphia? How are they combating the additional cost of parking, and what are they doing there?
Sure. So lots of different pieces to that question. Let me just say, if we were walking around, if you could bring one or two colleges or universities right into the middle of the downtown, that would be a huge step. You want the risk oblivious 18 to 22-year-olds. They're not afraid to be in cities. They're out walking. They'll drive you crazy as well, but that's one of the first sets of foot soldiers. That also happens to be when they graduate, the young employees who would like that live-work environment. On the business side, there are certainly lots of firms that live off of young creative workers, young college workers, and so the more of those people you have downtown, we're not having to commute. Now, to go way back in 1993, we convened a whole group of people, and we were talking about the need for parking in downtown Philadelphia, and one woman who was in the room said, you know, Toledo, Ohio has lots of parking. Paris has no parking. Which city do you want Philadelphia to be more like? And it stuck with me. It's not to say you don't need to address the desire for parking, but if you have the critical mass, if you have the arts and cultural attractions, if you have the workplace. Now, we built a downtown residential population in our core of 70,000 people with 130,000 immediately adjacent neighborhoods. So we have lots of grocery stores, lots of dog parks, lots of schools. We've got 45% of those people who live and work in the downtown. So that's your goal. So you start with younger people because they're the most literally risk oblivious. They'll be all the places their parents don't want them to be. And they will be your foot soldiers in many of the beginning processes of recovery. But you've got young professionals. And then, as Larisa said, you've got families who are empty nesters at this point. You've got a long way of work to go in that regard, but you've already started down that path. I would not be paralyzed. You're going to lose some firms who want only the suburban and only the parking lots, but you're going to have those firms who want the creative workers, who want the walkable environment, and you've got to pursue that as well. So I'm not so sure it's a complete answer, but I would not be paralyzed by the fact that the suburbs can offer free parking. You'll never compete with the suburbs on their terms. You need to compete with them on urban terms, which is walkability, mixed use, etc.
So just following up on that, like if the city and downtown they were going to do something, do you believe it should be, and they have a pot of money for a couple of years and things like that, should it be based on trying to attract more of those firms that rent the burbs, or should it be investing in a building for that crucial infrastructure I'm talking about? Sidewalks, crosswalks, bike paths, things like that.
Look, it's all of the above. I mean, what bids can do best is improve the public environment. That's what they're charged to do, right? So whether it's clean and safe, whether it's animating, whether it's improving the streetscape, and you showed a slide, improve a roadway and make it into a bike path, and people want to invest near it. What bids do best is leverage other investments, but what bids do is convene a whole group of people, and you have lots of resources and mental energy here that ought to be tapped into to plan that. If there are incentives that attract certain types of businesses, put them in place. That's what your economic development agency can do. But I'd be very careful about just industry-specific incentives, because we usually in the public sector pick winners badly. You want incentives that are available for whoever is willing to come in. So yes, you do need to incentivize firms. Yes, there are circumstances where particular firms, you want to go get them and it's worth doing. But as a general principle, create a competitive environment, create an attractive environment, create a great public domain, and let the brokers do their job.
Sure. Question that's probably going to irk a couple people in the room, but what do you think the branding issue is for Albany? You know, we're City of Albany, Downtown Albany, Albany County, but we're also trying to brand ourselves as a region, and that's multiple cities. You know, Philadelphia doesn't seem to have that. Paris doesn't have that. So do you think that that's hurting us in our efforts to become a destination?
I don't know if we necessarily have a branding issue. I think sometimes we're a bit conservative and afraid to take chances or risks. But I agree 100% with Paul. If we had a university or colleges down here that we're often compared to like Columbus, Ohio, look at what's happening there. It's vibrant. There's, I think, 12 universities or colleges in Columbus, and all of those universities just generate so much activity. So, but yeah, I'm not sure we have a branding issue necessarily. Just my opinion. I don't know if you guys have anything to add from an outsider's
I
perspective.
don't know enough about it, the other cities. I would just be self-centered and market the hell out of
So if you couldn't hear, he said we should be self-centered and just market the hell out of Albany. So point taken. Definitely will write that down. Any other questions, Leila?
I have a question about retail. Do you think we should have all of our Albany there for retail that we can factor that would do better for
Great question. I can't answer that without running some numbers, but generally what we're seeing is, if you're trying to grow your neighborhood, you want neighborhood goods and services. So the question I would have for you and toss it back, are you meeting the needs of your residents, and local neighborhood goods and services? When I was here last, there was a downtown market that sold organic groceries on South Pearl, which has since closed. For reasons that are probably unrelated to the demand for some degree of downtown grocery and special food, right? And we talked about every operator sometimes, and COVID certainly didn't help. But, when I look around, I don't see a lot of offerings for folks who live here. And if we want this to be a great place to live, you're going to have to think about the goods and services that need and businesses that can, thread the needle and meet the needs of residents over here and then have lunch over here because they're meeting the needs of office workers. Those are the kinds of businesses that will succeed because they're able to meet.
I'm Keith Mailer, I'm Maurice. So you all
Provided a wonderful lunch for us today. So thank you.
I can just add a little bit to the retail aspect of things. There are nights that I can put my head on a pillow and worry about paying the rent. So in a perishables industry that we live in, and I'm sure Angelo can attest to this as well, selling clothing across the street. Is there any way, and I think this is going to go to CDRE, maybe Mark as well, Radburn, the big players in the area. You take a small family-owned business, whether it be food or clothing or something else, and our rent is in contract, and we're responsible for paying that on a monthly basis. And if we have 2 off weeks in downtown, providing the best quality product, and the best clothing, and the best floor, whoever we are, when we look at this thing as a whole in a small municipality or a city, the private entity owner has to pay the rent. And if you fall behind on rent 2 months, it takes you 2 years to get caught up. Now you folks absorb that, right, initially, but contractually, we're held obligated to pay that dollar amount. So I guess the question for us to answer is there any way that we can entice small retail-owned businesses or people to come into our cities where we can offset some of that less sleepless nights for us? Who can we attract without having the burden of that huge rental expense on them?
Right. And I don't have an answer for you, unfortunately, just being honest. Because the other side of the coin is the landlord who's leasing the space, they've got obligations to pay as well. So that's why they need rent so they can pay their mortgage and operating expenses.
That goes back to Paul, who said that incentive. That incentive program that's available to a whole, rather than trying to cherry pick one at a time. The impact of all the recommendations is involved. You have the incentive. What should you have to get there?
I will add on that question. When we work with single owner environments, whether it's a mall, increasingly malls are mixed use, we always talk about the ground floor as being value additive. So what the ground floor is doing, it's not generating rent to cover the costs for just that space. It's generating value for the 2 to 10 stories or however many floors are above, which more than allow for some degree, there's an acknowledgement, there's this cross-subsidization, and that we need to offer businesses, create an environment in which business activity, the great coffee shop, the great pizza shop, and we're working in New Rochelle right now, if you're familiar, lots of downtown development in downtown New Rochelle. Many of the real estate developers there have 10 to 15 story buildings, and they are giving away their ground floor space to the most interesting retailer they can. And it's the cute little Joe's coffee shop on one corner, because they know that residents are not going to want to rent apartments above if there isn't something interesting at the ground floor. So, it's also the mindset of the owner and the acknowledgement that these two things connect. In a mixed use environments like you have now, it's actually really challenging to do. So that's a benefit that, these single owner environments have over your environment.
Let me amplify that in a different way. And if you take a traditional retail block and say it's a 3 to 4 story building, the retail on the ground floor can be as much as 60% of NOI. Really hard for that owner to give that away. On the other hand, as Larisa was saying, somebody who's building or renovating a whole new residential building, and most of their income's coming out of the upper floors, can afford to partially give away that ground floor as an incentive. The hardest nut to crack, I think, in the commercial office building is every office tenant who's waiting for that, or the office owner is waiting for that restaurant or bank to come back. And they don't want to rent to somebody who doesn't serve their building. But that, to me, is the change we're trying to cultivate. Can you rethink the ground floor of office buildings to have them appeal to a broader market? The owners, that's the last thing they want to do. But I know it's not solving your problem in a specific building, but it's really hard to to give away 60% of NOI, to give away 5% in an office or in a residential building might be the way you could induce some of the retail you want.
And to add further to that, I was speaking to a local developer who's told me, and I was shocked by this stat, that the restaurants or the first floor retail below their apartments, they analyzed how much the apartments above supported that retail. Only 7% of the sales came from people within the building. You would think, if it's a deli or something, probably 50% because there's 40 apartments upstairs. It's not how it works. I was surprised, really.
This is one of the places where I think we really need to rethink customary practice, and we're going to pursue some wrong ideas. I think you need to be willing to try a couple of things that don't work, because we don't know the answer. But if this is one where we can change how we think about the ground floor of upper buildings, it could be a major opportunity. Just get creative, at minimal risk, try a few things, and if you fall on your face, don't blame people for doing that. You need to experiment in this environment.
I'm here as a resident, so maybe I'm a little obvious here. But when I think about Albany, it's a little bit unique because it's a mid-sized city that's also in the middle of New York City. So we have a large swath, and we're looking at it right now, the city that's for the state. It's operating in all the as the state. So we have that specifically back in office. It's not really on Albany, it's like the state issue. Does that make as big of a difference as I think it's ahead, or is it not?
I have to be diplomatic here, but yes, it makes a huge difference. And when I was here 15, 20 years ago, the fact that you have 40,000 office workers who don't need to come into the downtown is a problem. To the extent that some of those offices can be in the downtown, not owning the buildings, but leasing them, that could be huge. Whether a governor could do that, I don't know your politics. But to have that mass of people disconnected from the downtown is a challenge. Whether you can solve that challenge, I don't know, but if you could, it could have a huge impact on the vitality of Albany. But if that makes bad headline for some like mayor, perhaps I hope.
Can I just say, piggybacking on what she said, Albany has been recession-proof pretty much because the state is the number one employer. So I think downtown Levy in particular should be honing in on those office workers, even though that number has decreased over the last 2.5 years. I have faith that eventually the government will incentivize getting back to work, but the fact that the plaza was built with these underground garages where people, come to work with their Tupperware and then go back underground and never walk through, it's on the bid to make available these opportunities earlier in the day, 12 o'clock for lunch, 4 o'clock. For Maurice, the fact that events are canceled, the day before, even though he's prepared financially. So there's got to be things that we do to try to get that workforce that's here on the streets. And I think once that happens, things will pick up. I'm a resident, and I know for a fact, and not me in particular, because I'm someone who walks a lot, that the walkability of the city is directly tied in to the safety of the streets. So that was one thing we didn't touch on. So when I walk around, I'm very aware of my environment. I grew up in the Bronx, New York. I like downtown, but if we don't talk about the safety of our neighborhoods, there's no walkability because there's no safety, and there's no connectivity because there's no safety. So what can we do about that?
I'll start. I mean, you had two very big questions in there. I mean, let me just say that in my job, I spend 80% of my time trying to solve solvable problems and 20% dreaming about how to solve unsolvable problems, right? So this is a 20% issue over here. It's huge, but you're not going to impact it right away. I'm not saying don't figure out how to do that, but you've got to work with what is doable here. If you can lure people out of that building to come this way, that's going to help you enormously. Clearly, the more people you have on the street, the safer it is. And clearly, all of us are trying to work through, we need to rethink what public safety is about. But that's a key issue. But, we have numbers in Philadelphia in which we see that the people coming into the downtown are significantly higher at nighttime on weekdays than the daytime, which I conclude people are terrified of their offices, but they feel very safe in Boston restaurants.
Our firm, touching on the front thing, our firm did a comprehensive study, I think it was 3 or 4 months ago now, of markets across the country, mid-size, large, and the point was, what are the common characteristics and what aren't the common characteristics of the hardest hit office buildings in each of those markets? The number one attribute that they all had was they were all in high crime areas or areas where there was perceived public safety issues. Number one, every single building had that. The surprising thing that they didn't all have was age. Age was not a factor in an office building of whether it was fully occupied or vacant. You could have buildings from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It didn't matter. The other characteristics besides the public safety issue was, are there nearby amenities? Not necessarily because you was there amenities in the building. It wasn't that. It was, can I go outside, feel safe while I'm doing it, and go 2 blocks to a deli down the street to get lunch. And then, of course, as you've all read, another characteristic was geographically where is it located, because Northeast, Pacific, they're particularly hard hit office markets as opposed to the Sun Belt. So,
One rule of thumb we often use is, and so I want to maybe caution, assuming that those folks are going to come here too much, is that the average office worker won't walk more than 400 linear feet from their desk for lunch during the day.
They'll run on an exercise.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so proximity really, really matters, and we've also tracked that people used to take lunch hours. They don't take lunch hours now. They take lunch half hours, and so even making it easier for someone to cross the street easily matters. You're making it, the turnaround time, it's all about time. It's all about transportation, in my mind, but allowing them to get there and back very easily and safely. So by my sense, that's much more than 400 linear feet, all of those folks. And so maybe we should set that aside for a moment and say, what can we do with the folks who are our primary customers here? How can we build this market and make it stronger? How can we make sure that you who already lives here feels comfortable and safe walking downtown, give you what you want so that you come more frequently? That's sort of the tack that I end up taking. As you said, it's an intractable problem. It's something we want to tackle, but there's so many fundamental issues that we can tackle in the next 3 to 5 years that will get us further for our investment than, trying to solve for that.
So I just want to be cognizant of time. We're running a little late, and but I think there are several takeaways from both the panel discussion today as well as some of the conversations that we had last night. And I think some of it is that we're already on the right path, especially for a city of our size, right? The removing over 1 million of unused square feet of unused, underutilized vacant office space and turning those into apartments, and needing to do more of those through the incentives through the Industrial Development Agency and continuing, hopefully, to advocate on some of the legislation, like some of the ones that was recently passed. So really working on that continued diversification. I think the other thing is really looking at, we talked a little bit last night about, and you brought up today, these concentration nodes, right? Like where really should that be? Where should that, laser focus happen? And then where we're already seeing some successes. So we talked a little bit about that. And then the third, two more things. We talked a little bit about the, looking at first floor retail and do we need to always have retail in every single vacant first floor? And then the fourth thing we talked about was the brain power of the folks in this room who are committed to downtown and getting together and really strategizing about financial incentives, packages, what should we really be doing for attracting that next group of residents, visitors, and office tenants. So I think we have some marching orders, and I think you'll be hearing from several, at least from myself, and trying to convene some of those meetings and conversations. But I want to thank you all for coming. I want to congratulate Carm again. Thank you for being an incredible partner with us. I want to thank Motor Oil Coffee, who donated the coffee and came today. Their coffee is fantastic. And Keith at Larisa's for the food. If you didn't get enough or we rushed you to come into this meeting, please, I'm sure there's some leftovers, so take it with you. And grab an annual report on your way out. Our panelists will be here for a little bit longer. They do need to catch a train. But if you have any specific questions that you didn't get to ask, please come up and speak with them. And thank you again to all of our sponsors. And we look forward to 2023.